In order to configure a virtual port channel, we need to follow the following configuration steps. The first thing we need to do is create a vPC domain. The second thing we need to do is establish peer keep alive connectivity. The third thing that we need to do is create a peer link, and the fourth thing we need to do is create our vPCs. It is very important to make sure our configurations are consistent between the two peer devices. Let's take a look at the console. Okay, here we are at our Nexus 5548 switch. In order to configure a vPC, the first thing we need to do is change to our configure terminal mode. The second thing we need to do is make sure that we have feature vPC enabled. Remember, we have to turn on the feature in order to use this functionality, because it's off by default. The second thing that we need to do is create a vPC domain. vPC domain number 1. We want to make sure that each one of our vPC domains or pairs of switches has a unique domain number. And it's a best practice to use a new vPC number for every domain, whether you have one data center or two data centers. You wouldn't want to use vPC domain 1 and 2 in data center 1 and 1 and 2 in data center 2. Because someday you might link these data centers with your data center interconnect, and now they are one big network, and you have conflicting vPC domains. Inside of our vPC domain, there are several configuration options. The first thing we want to do is specify a peer keep alive link. Now, because these peers are 5548s, I'm actually going to use the management 0 interface. So I'm going to show running config for the interface management 0. And that way I can see the source address for my peer keep alive. I also want to check my peer switch and find the destination address for my peer keep alive, which is right here. Interface management 0 is at 245 address. Now I can configure my peer keep alive. I do so by typing peer keep alive and then the destination address, which is the IP address on the other side, and then my source address, or where I am coming from, which is the management interface on this side. Now in this case, I want to specify my VRF as the management VRF. Remember, when you're doing things in the Nexus platform, you have to specify the VRF that you want to use. And there's two by default, a management and a default. And in this case, I'm using the management. So I'll go ahead and configure that. Now, if this was a brand new configuration, I'd want to do the same thing on the other side. But I already have the other side configured. So now I can do a show vPC, and I'll see that the peer is alive. I can also see that I have not configured my peer link. I have only configured my peer keep alive. So I'm going to go ahead and exit out of this configuration. And the next thing that I need to do is create a peer link. And if I do a show port channel summary, I can see that I already have port channels defined. And in this case, I want to use port channel 10 for my vPC peer link. So I'm going to go ahead and go into my interface, port channel 10, and I'm going to specify that this interface is the vPC peer link. Now once I press enter, I'm going to get a warning message, and then my peer link should be up and functioning. If I do a show vPC now, I can see that yes, my peer is alive, my peer keep alive is working correctly, and I have a peer adjacency formed, and I can see the peer link status below, which is VPC ID 1, port channel 10 is up, and the active VLANs going across it are the ones that I want to use for my VPC connection. Your VPC peer link must include all of the VLANs that you're going to use for all of your VPC links. Now I can go to interface E1/25. I can configure this interface into a port channel by typing channel group 66 mode active. That was a little bit confusing, so I'm going to go ahead and run the interface, show the running config of the interface, so you can see the command that I typed. Channel group 66 mode active, meaning I'm using LACP for my port channel, and then I can go into my interface port channel 66. I can go ahead and configure that for VPC 66, and I want to use the same number as the port channel. It's a best practice and it makes it easier to troubleshoot. And press enter, and now that link is part of VPC 66. So once again, if I do a show VPC, I can see that I have my peer link, and then I have my VPC port 66 configured, and it's currently down because I haven't configured it on the other side. So all of this config would have to be created on both of your VPC peers, and they have to be equal in order for everything to work correctly. The only thing that will be different will be the peer keep alive. The source and the destination will be different on each side. Please join me for the next lesson, Verifying VPC.